Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Painted in Color podcast. I'm co-host Lauren Brown, joined by co-host Mia Araujo, and today we're going to just do a shorter episode to talk about the wrap-up of GenCon, which I just attended this past 2 weekends ago, a weekend ago. I don't really remember. Time is a weird soup. So I think I'm just going to talk about basically how it compared to ACON, the previous convention I did after pandemic, what it was like post-pandemic, and how everything went down. So as we get started, how are you doing, Mia?
I'm doing good. I'm just waiting with bated breath to hear how the show went for you because I actually haven't done shows since 2019, so I'm kind of living vicariously through all of you.
Yeah, you were missed at Gen Con too. Like I missed like having the cuddle.
No, oh man, I'm just waiting for that day.
I know one day we'll be back.
Yeah.
But it was overall still a good show. And it was funny because I overall like had uh almost accidentally flew out at the wrong times because Gen Con starts on Thursday and I think I had forgotten when I was booking my plane tickets. So I ended up booking my ticket to fly out on Thursday morning,
Oh,
and
oh.
that would have been a nightmare.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I would have gotten in, I think at 9:30, and like the show started at 10. So like by the time I would have gotten from the airport to the show, it would have already been started and I would have had to just make my setup. So
Yeah.
fortunately at the last minute, I was able to change my flight to Wednesday
Oh,
and had all day to set up instead. Um, but so like it started off with like that kind of like panic of like, oh my God, like what have I done?
hey, but it worked out. I mean, it would have sucked if you found out the day of, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it really did. So I was happy about that. And then once I got there, I had probably some of the worst imposter syndrome
Oh no,
I had
why?
ever had because so first off, I was just like, I don't know why I was started out feeling so insecure about everything once again. I'd already been through it before. I attended in 2019 and did really well. But I when I was getting my table set up together, I hadn't tested it in advance because I was just rushing into the last minute like I always do, trying to get everything ready. And then once I got there, I just couldn't figure out how to kind of arrange everything with what I had. I was like, I don't know how to display everything in a way that makes it look really pleasing. Um, and I also didn't have my backing tablecloths because this year I had two pro panels instead of one. And so I only had one tablecloth to cover the pro panel. And I was like, well, I can't put my teal backdrop, my colors to make my world happen. So I just like felt very kind of insecure about that because I didn't feel like it was like super cohesive yet. And then I ended up walking through some of the other aisles and just seeing everybody's like beautiful put together setups, and like it was like Tim and Dustin, and like they had like
Oh,
these
yeah.
curated beautiful tables, and like they're so sweet. Like it was wonderful to see it. But I was like, oh man, my table doesn't look nearly as good. Like, what if I do?
Mm.
So on Friday, I just kept the gray pro panel backdrop, and just had, I guess no, Thursday I had the gray pro panel backdrop, and rush ordered from Amazon tablecloths so that I could get them in for at least part of the show.
Oh, that's
Um,
smart.
yeah, so like I was like, okay, at least they're going to come in then. Um, but it ended up not mattering. It didn't
Oh,
matter at all. Once I got my table together and once everything was displayed, um, it was like all bets were off. I don't understand what happened this year, but it was just nonstop all weekend. It was crazy. Um, and I'm not exactly sure why it was. I think that part of the reason was probably because, uh, you know, during pandemic, people couldn't really come out to conventions. I know Gen Con held the 2021 show, but it was definitely a lot smaller. And the artist alley was like probably not even half of
oh,
what
wow.
it was this year. Um, the way I had heard it was like they had like a bunch of just like center displays where they had like the kind of like, I don't, this is really hard to explain, but they have this display where there's like three pro panels like back to back to each other, and it's like kind of like a circle in the middle of the floor.
Mm.
Last year apparently was all of those, because like usually they reserve the circle for just like um the guests of honor artists that
Right.
are there. So last year they had everybody in that arrangement because
Mm.
it was just so small.
Got it.
So I thought that was really interesting to hear. Um, but I think part of it is just because like people didn't really have that outlet last year. Like the attendance was so low before, and like, this year was like the first year that it really got close to normal again. And I think people were very eager to spend, but also I had more enamel pins this time. I had all my trash animal designs. They debuted for the first time at Gen Con uh, as well as the Animal Crossing pins did. They like, you should have seen my board. It was so funny. So I had like I had my enamel pin board, and all the Animal Crossing balloon pins were there, and then like my Pokeball pins were right underneath it, just on its own board. So like, it's very clear, very legible, so everybody could see it. I learned my lesson from Acon. But it was just hilarious because by Sunday, all of the designs were sold out. And it was to the point where people were like, "Can I put dibs on this display copy?" And I was like, "Yes, you can put dibs on it, but you have to come pick it up on Sunday."
Oh my
Like,
God.
by like the last 3 hours of Sunday, the entire board was empty.
That's
Except for the
amazing.
Pokeball pins. Like, all the Animal Crossing pins were gone.
Oh my God.
I was like, "Oh no, it looks so barren."
It's a good problem to have.
It's a very good problem to have. Um, but I thought that was really funny because like that had never happened before. I'd never sold out of that much stuff before. I brought my journals. My journals did really well. I brought 22 of them, and literally all but one sold out, which was the display copy was the one that was left, and I gave that to a friend. And I was like, "Here, you have this. You helped me with my table." Um, but that's like exactly the thing that you want, right? Like, for
Yeah.
all but one copy to sell out, to know that you brought the exact right amount.
Yeah.
So that's what happened to my journals. All of my bags had sold out. My kind of like cute Pokemon bags, and I sold 12 originals that were like ink and like pencil originals. Um, I took pictures of all the people who, actually, no, 13, because there's one I didn't take a picture of. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, so I sold like a bunch of those originals, and like I don't know what happened.
Her art is awesome. That's what happened. And yes,
Stop it,
pent up
Mia.
demand and stuff, but they wouldn't buy your work if it wasn't good. So
Thank you, Mia.
I just love the story though, hearing that you were so nervous and so like, oh my gosh, I'm so not ready. And then it was just like doors open and it's like the complete opposite happens. Like I love hearing that.
Thank you. And it's funny too, because I feel like Gen Con, like I'm always a little nervous before every convention
Yeah.
or every show, but Gen Con in particular is the one that really psychs me out, just because like it's like one of the ones where I still can't fathom how I got in the first place. And like getting the validation right after is like, I don't know what to do with it, because I'm just like, I've never performed like this at any other show before.
Yeah.
And I just think like, I'm like, "Oh, I guess like this must be my target audience."
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think, one of the benefits to going to a show like Gen Con, where the artist alley is so high caliber and is so like established with veterans, is that having me there, whose style is completely different from a lot of people, I think really helps, because I might have talked about this before, but at anime conventions, my style is still unique, but everything that you see is generally going to be kind of colorful, more animated, more just like kind of more similar in type to the stuff that I do. But at a place like Gen Con, where a lot of it is like painterly, hyper realistic, beautiful, beautiful art, Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, all that stuff. And then you have me, who looks like is just different. I think it goes to my benefit, because like it just stands out from a lot of people. And it's definitely not to knock anybody, because again, like everybody's work is amazing there, and it's a high caliber art show. But I think that does go to my benefit. So it's something that I never would have planned or never would have thought. It just happened to work out that way. Um, and I wouldn't even like guess that. Like, several people had said that, like, they're like, "Oh, like your art is like, different. It's like so colorful." And like, again, like once I got my teal backdrops going too, like I was able to really have my world kind of set up so that you could see my table from, pretty far away. Uh oh yeah, too, another thing, another reason why I was so nervous at the beginning was because my table was situated next to two big poles, like two big pillars.
Oh,
Um, and like those were facing like the aisle that was like inside the art show. And like the other aisle was facing towards like the main floor, where all the other game and exhibitor booths were. And I was a little worried about the poles being there, because I was afraid that people would walk by my table and not see it. and also like maybe not come down our aisle at all. And so what I did, like how I adapted, was I had a big banner that was aligned to one side of my table. That was the side that was visible to the exhibitor aisle. Um, and so like from far away, like from pretty far back, because I did my walkthrough that I usually do, you could see it from like a good distance. And then the color of the teal kind of like really drew you in, like it stood out a lot. So I was like, okay, like that's good. I put it exactly where it needed to be. And then on the other side is where I had all my prints and everything. And so like I was hoping that that would work out, but I was really nervous that people wouldn't come to my table because there was kind of like an obstacle in the way. Whereas other rows didn't really have that. But I was really happy to see that it didn't really affect anything at all.
That's awesome.
Because people like came through the aisles anyway.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. So so I was happy about that.
yeah. I'm glad it worked out, because that can always be scary when you don't have control over where your placement is. And if everyone's there, you can't be moved to another spot. But I wanted to go back to something you said earlier about standing out from everyone else. I think the thing is that a lot of people don't apply to shows where they feel like they won't fit in, for the reason that you thought, like that same thing, you know. And this is a great testament to anyone listening, that if you don't feel like your art might fit in, apply anyway. If you get in,
Yeah.
that means you do belong there. And if you stand out, as you're seeing with Lauren here, there's less competition for the style of work you do. Whereas if everyone's doing the same kind of genre of art, it's harder for them to stand out amongst themselves. So I think it's always a good thing to stand out personally. But I also understand the nerves associated with being the odd one out or whatever, in a good way or a bad way. You don't know, you don't know
Yeah.
until you try. But
Exactly. Because like you really don't have the idea of how it's going to skew. Like, am I going to stand out in a way that people are like, "Ew, what is that doing here?" Or
yeah,
am I going to stand out in a good way? And you just don't know until you do that attempt. But I think it's definitely really important to at least try and see what happens if you have the means to do so. Um, I think another takeaway from Gen Con too is like learning how to be adaptable for different situations. Like if you get put next to a pole, or if you're in a convention that doesn't have good lighting. Now, fortunately, Gen Con has amazing lighting. It's very bright in there, but there's some cons where I think Otakon is a good example. There was a dark part to the Maryland Convention Center back, or Baltimore Convention Center back in the day where it was still in Baltimore. That was just, it was very difficult to see any of the artist tables because it was just generally like in kind of a danker area.
mm,
And people would adapt by actually having lighting there and making sure that their table stood out regardless of the circumstances. So I think learning how to be adaptable despite not having control over your table placement is a really good thing to be able to do. And I think it's good to at least research once you get the map where you're going to be sitting. And if you know anybody who has done the show before, maybe ask and see like, hey, is this layout a little bit weird? If I'm placed over here, or is this a good spot? Et cetera. Like at least ask. And sometimes you're not going to be able to do that. And sometimes you're just not going to know until you get there. But I think, having some kind of like backup plan if the hall is too dark, if you're in a weird spot, finding a way to draw that attention to your table is a really important thing to do to adapt.
definitely. And we're talking about too in previous episodes about like not having the resources maybe to have all the merch that you might want. A good investment would be some kind of display enhancement, whether it is lighting or whether it is something like a bold banner or something, even if it means having less items at your table in your first couple shows. I think that would actually bring more people to your table than having more stuff that people can't see very well or that wouldn't stand out very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like even if you don't have everything on your table, I think it's probably better to not have every single thing on your table because sometimes like we're talking about in the last episode, it can tend to look too cluttered. And
Mhm.
so you want to make sure you declutter, but then have an avenue for people to look through more of your stuff. So obviously put your best sellers out and have them be visible. And then what I did was I brought one of those craft roller like those carts that has 3 tiers on it. I covered the top with tablecloth like I did last 2019, and I put my originals in it, and I also like in the back put like extra prints in there too, so that when people could thumb through, they could see the extra stuff that I had on offer that wasn't necessarily on my table,
Yeah.
but still gave them a means to see the art. And they're not my best sellers, so like if they see it and don't buy it, like they probably wouldn't have like it wouldn't have been a big deal anyway.
Yeah.
But the best sellers for sure were the ones on display, and lo and behold, they sold out. So it worked out like without me having to clutter up my table.
Yeah. That's awesome. Do you mind sharing how many prints you brought with you? Like we talked a little bit about how many to bring of each design, but how do you
Yeah.
find that out? How do you decide that?
So my Avant-Garden series, which I just finished a new queen for, was the Ginkgo queen. Um, I brought, I think, 15 of each of those prints,
Oh,
for the mushroom, the ginkgo, and the rose, and that wasn't enough at all.
yeah, it sounds low to me, like
It
hearing.
was low. I have, I come from a place where I have very low confidence in my print sales because they never really sell that well.
Yeah.
Just in general, it's usually my enamel pins and my smaller stuff that sells the best, and the prints are just what draws people in. But not at Gen Con. Gen Con, everybody was wanting to buy prints. So I sold out of those pretty quickly. Probably, I think by Saturday, I was sold out of like almost all of them. And then I opened pre-orders so that people could, order it with free shipping. And, I was able to, because I can print them at home. So I was like, I told them like, hey, I can get these to you like basically like by the end of the week or next week. Because I can print them at home and just ship them out to you. And most people were okay with that. So, they went ahead and ordered the queens. And I think one other thing too that worked for my benefit was the fact that I was offering um, buy two, get one free on my prints. And the queens come in a series of three. So it makes perfect sense to have all three of those prints. So
Right.
like having like sales that match up with what you're displaying is a really good idea because like you want people to walk away with a certain amount of things as a bundle. And so like set up the sale in order for them to do that. And having that bundle is still a pretty good profit. Like it sounds like, oh, like it's a lot to like give away a print for free, but it really isn't because like when you calculate the cost of all three of those and what it actually is, you still get a fairly well profit margin, especially for the fact that I print at home. So like it's not that expensive for me to do, but they're really nice quality prints. I do them on luster paper, and I do them at high quality on the Canon Pro 100 that I have. So it's worth what I'm asking for, but it's a good sale to have. So that worked really well. Um,
And
I
again, real quick, the other thing that you get by like, I think that the other thing about the deal is that you're rewarding that person for coming to the show to see you. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So it's like you'll charge full price on your store because that is how much they're worth. But the discount is part of an incentive to bring people out to actually pay for the con, show up at your table and that sort of thing. So that's all I want to bring up.
Yeah, exactly. And also the pre-orders too. People would often say like, "Oh, I'll just buy it in your Etsy shop." And I was like, "Well, you can do that, but you have to pay shipping. If you pre-order here, you don't have to pay shipping." So it's an additional discount for like, thank you for buying my stuff here live at the show. I want you to have this now. But like, let me give this to you later. And as a gift, you don't have to pay shipping. So there's a lot of incentives for people to come out physically at shows because, it's that's where you get most of your audience coming from. You get a big bulk of people, and so you want to kind of let them know that you're appreciating them for that. And so like emphasizing that to them, because I don't think everybody understands that, is also really important too.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think before you had asked me how many of my prints did I bring. So
Mhm.
to backtrack to that, so I brought my three queens. I brought the mushroom jewelry, the Zelda series, and some of my other original like prints and everything. um there was more interest for my originals than I had at previous conventions, just by far. Usually only at conventions people only are interested in like the fan art ones, like the Zelda ones and the Spirited Away. Though Spirited Away did do really well, and that one also sold out too. But the Zelda ones didn't sell out as quickly, and it was much more in favor of the original, like, works that I had for my own, just like for my own world.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool.
That
I
is-
think I think because like Gen Con is a tabletop convention, people have a lot of appreciation for original narrative stuff because that's kind of like what, the realm is like user generated content, D&D, and and other RPGs where people like make up their own universes and worlds. And I think there's just more of an acknowledgement for that and appreciation for that. So that was an interesting observation there. Um, so it's just interesting how my different prints perform very differently at this one versus other conventions that I generally tend to go to. But I think probably around I want to say like I think 18 to 20 different designs of prints. Because I don't have that much. Again, I don't specialize in prints as much as I do my smaller wares, my enamel pins. I had charms there, my enamel pins, my bags, my journals, and I feel like there's one other merch type that I'm forgetting right now, but I think that's
Original
generally
art.
about it.
Right, original art.
Yeah, my originals as well. So like my actual sketches and stuff. So those are the that's the kind of spread that I had. And the enamel pins were I think the best performers, and then prints were following right on its heels. So that was pretty cool.
But yeah, selling 13 originals is really good too. So it's like that's its own category of
Yeah.
doing well. So
Oh, that was definitely its own category for sure. Like it was like basically on Square, it was like considered undocumented or like unaccounted for purchases. And it was like the best category, but my Spirited Away listing on Square was also a little messed up. So Spirited Away was wrapped up into that too.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, I think trying to think what else. There was a lot of unique things that happened at Gen Con. So another thing that debuted at Gen Con was my use of QR codes and my link tree that basically like brought them to the pre-order page. So it was interesting because I think that people didn't like, I think people are still not used to scanning QR codes just yet.
Mm.
But once I told them how to do it, they would usually scan it and be like, okay, like here, like, oh, I guess like I go to your link tree. And so like the way that I set it up was I had a QR code that was like in a plastic display on my table. And I also had QR codes for Venmo and PayPal just in case Square didn't work. Fortunately, it worked all weekend, so that was nice. That was really nice. So the top QR code was what they used. It brought them to a link tree that had my mailing list that I finally set up. I did it. I did it.
Yes.
That I forgot to tell people about the first 2 days of the convention because I wasn't
All the
used to it
time.
anymore. I was like, oh, I need to get better about this. So I brought them to my mailing list, of course, my website. And I also had my Gen Con pre-order page, which was basically a Google form that people could fill out on their own phone. And basically it's like, okay, like what's your name? What did you buy? Like what category of item did you buy? Because I have multiples of like mushroom, journal versus mushroom print. So I wanted to make sure there was different categories. So enamel pins, prints, like which one did you get? And then they can fill out specifics of what they got. So mushroom queen 11x17 print. And I would tell them specify the size because I don't know what you ordered if you ordered a small or large one. And then they can fill out their own address. They can fill out their phone number and their email address so I can contact them. But I really like that method a lot. Because first off, I got like 50 pre-orders. It was ridiculous.
That's
And
awesome.
second off, I didn't have to worry about me having to be distracted from my customers while trying to like get somebody else's address information correct. Having them put it in themselves ensures that it's most likely correct. So that really helped eliminate that kind of roadblock there. And it freed me up to take on more sales for other customers that were waiting. So I really like that method, and I'm definitely going to continue to use that again. And I highly encourage anybody to take that on. If you sell out of anything, to take on pre-orders and to have people fill out the address information themselves. And all of the setup was free. QR code was free. The Google form was free. So it came to no expense to me to be able to set this up. So everybody can definitely do this. And I think I didn't do my menus, but for Dragon Con, I'm probably going to do a menu just so people can easily see, like what I'm selling. I just didn't have time to set one up this time, but next time for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. That's let us know how that does. But I love this QR code idea and the Google Forms because I used to have people like write down what they're ordering, and it's just like I don't want to have to figure out their handwriting either,
No.
So especially for an address that's supposed to ship somewhere. So that's brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. And like when people write things down too, there's a chance that you can lose it.
Yeah.
There's a chance that, yeah, again, the chicken scratch handwriting sometimes is very difficult to interpret. So
Yeah.
then I'll have to email them hoping that it would go to the right address and being like, hey, what does this say?
Yeah.
Mind you, I still did have to email a few people. I have 2 mushroom lady prints. So sometimes like, people wouldn't specify which one they wanted and like what size they wanted. It was interesting. I think the biggest error that I got on the forums was that some people just didn't finish their address. So like they didn't put their city or their zip code or the state. I'm just like,
I didn't
can you
expect this to get to you.
And some of them I could figure out on my own because I was like, okay, this is the only, I look up on Google, it's the only
Right.
one, and it's in Indianapolis. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But
Right.
some of them I'm like, okay, I have to reach out to them and be like, hey, like, what is this? Is this your address? And they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And they usually fix it. But that was a really interesting side effect of of the form, just didn't finish their address. I was like, huh,
That's funny.
not expected at all. But yeah, like aside from it just being an exceptional show in sales, it was also just really good generally to see people again. And just to enjoy like the company and like, regardless of the pandemic and everything, like we all wore our masks and stuff like that. Like Gen Con actually did a great job at mandating that people wear their masks. So I felt really safe. And some people definitely still caught COVID, unfortunately, but somehow I managed to dodge it, which I felt really lucky about. And like again, people were just very diligent about wearing their masks. I didn't see really anybody in the exhibitor hall without one on. And there was signage everywhere too. They made sure that it was being enforced and mandated and called out. And you also had to wear a wristband too. It was like a new thing this year where you had to get your COVID vaccination verification, or I think negative COVID test in 72 hours verification with this like yellow wristband, and you couldn't get into anywhere without that wristband. So
Did that in
they were,
California.
yeah, exactly. They were making sure that was really safe. So
Mm-hmm.
I was happy about that because at ACON they didn't really enforce it that heavily. So I feel like probably 30% of people were not wearing masks, and so it was refreshing to see it.
Yeah, definitely.
So that felt
It's
a
just a
lot
big
better.
show.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Gosh, I remember in 2019 the sea of people
Mhm.
though, like in the hall, and it wasn't like that. Like it was still a lot of people, but it wasn't like a wave of people like going to like one place.
That's even more impressive though, that there were less people and yet you made so much more than you'd have at any other show, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
by far. Yeah.
it's awesome.
Like if you could look, I think I was telling you this earlier, the graph on Square, Acon versus Gen Con. Acon was like this, like doop, and like Gen Con was like, like way higher. And like it was funny because Acon was already considered like a fairly good show. I was like, oh, it made pretty good here. I
Yeah,
was happy with what I made. And Gen Con, I just wasn't even, I wasn't even ready.
that's
So
great.
I felt really fortunate for that. So yeah, overall a really good con. Really well organized. It was easy to load in and load out. Trying to think what else. Yeah, I got to see amazing people. Didn't get a chance to do my art trades like I wanted to, but I'll see most of them at Dragon Con anyway, which is coming up in a few weeks. And I'm like, oh God, there's no rest. There's not really no rest.
And I'm like, you sold out of everything. What could you have traded?
Yeah, right. Like I don't know. I'm like, what do I sell now that I'm at Dragon Con? I guess I have to rely on prints.
So funny. Did you feel on Sunday that it was like kind of slower? If you were by that point, you probably sold out of most everything. You're open to pre-orders. Did it feel slower, or were there still people coming up and ordering stuff? Or
It was slower, but like it still performed very close to my best days. So like it was slower by like barely any margin. Um, and to put it into context, my best day at Gen Con was almost as good as the entirety of ACON.
wow.
So it was a really good weekend. And so yeah, Sunday, people had come to pick up their display copies, so my board was wiped out. People were doing their last minute purchases, making sure that they could travel with everything. Um, I feel like there was an increased concern about not wanting to damage their prints. So they were really adamant about having sleeves or some kind of way to protect their prints, which I have print sleeves so that, I can just like put them in the plastic and hold them. I also saw a bunch of artists have, these like kind of big like paper bags with their logos on it, which I thought was really cool. And so I might consider doing that for next Gen Con for sure. I don't have time to do it for Dragon Con. Just because I think it just looked neat, and it was like a big enough bag to put all their prints in. So I definitely saw a lot of that, but I lost my train of thought. It's gone.
No, I was just talking about if it was slower on Sunday, and you basically said no, it wasn't, because people were still picking up display copies, so still buying those off of you. Like
Yeah,
again, buying display copies off of you. That's that's how much they want it. That's how much they want to take it home. That's fucking awesome.
it was crazy. Yeah, it was really crazy. but no, Sunday was a really good day. Um, just generally another notable thing about Gen Con too was like the amount of companies that were interested in working with me. Like a bunch of tabletop gaming companies, board game companies, coming by, giving me their cards and and just like saying like, hey, like I want to reach out, like your style would be great for, X, Y, and Z. And I was like, well, that's really cool. Um, and also just like again, the interest in the avant-gardens and my queens, people really were happy, like receptive about those. Those did really well, and people were just interested in general about like what the story was behind them and like how I came up with the ideas. And it's very validating because like they're all very self-indulgent pieces, and it's just cool that like, oh, there's an interest in like what I specifically would create. And so that felt really good. But yeah, overall, Gen Con was fantastic. I think again, the takeaway is, apply to the show that you think you might not get into because you never know what can happen. And also having the ability to scout a show before you can go, if you have the chance to do it, is always really helpful just to see like
Yeah.
what kind of alley you're dealing with and what kind of environment it is. So it's not complete shock when you first go there. If you can do that. If you can't, that's fine. You can always cold turkey it too. Um, being adaptable in your setup and being able to adjust for any kind of situation. Um, that was like part of it was like my table setup and how I catered to like the one side that could see my table pretty clearly. And also getting the tablecloth so that I could have my setup the way I wanted it to be. Um, I also felt really, really lucky because my friends were driving and they were able to take some of my stuff. So I didn't have to fly with everything, which was super, super beneficial. I got really lucky, but for the most part, the things that I couldn't take with me, I shipped. And so like be wary, there might be a handling fee if you ship things and I had to pay a handling fee. So just like be aware of that.
You mean at the hotel? Like they charge you a handling fee? Yeah.
Yeah, they had a FedEx at the hotel, and the FedEx charged the handling fee for things that were over like 5 pounds, I think. So I did have to pay some of those fees. They weren't too much, fortunately, but it was still like enough to be like, what? Like, like I didn't know how to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it caught me on off guard a little bit, but just like be aware that that might be a possibility.
Definitely.
Um, and I think, yeah, overall, just like have fun and like having your authentic voice at your table is really important because like when people are like when you have an audience where people are invested in that voice, I think that's how you know that audience is for you.
Yeah.
So you know, go where your voice is appreciated and like make the things that you love to make. Because again, when I did, I didn't know how people would receive it, and I felt very fortunate to have that reception. So I was happy.
That's
It was a
awesome.
good Gen Con.
I'm so happy to hear that.
But yeah, is there anything else that I missed?
I mean, you pretty much covered it. I think the only thing unique about Gen Con that I noticed too in the last couple of years is that the weather that time of year can be kind of chaotic. And I've had canceled flights before, for instance, or delayed flights. So definitely keep that in mind if you're flying a day early or something like that, just to cushion your time going up there. But I guess the Midwest during that time of year tends to have storms. So that's probably something I'd advise people about.
That's true. Yeah, I think 2019 it did, didn't it? Where like it had rained some.
2018 definitely did too. Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that. Oh yeah. I think this time it only rained once, I believe, and it wasn't that bad. It was pretty hot.
Yeah.
But I had just come from Texas. Like I can deal with most heat at this point. It was, I was like, oh, this is nothing.
Yeah.
Um, so the weather was pretty okay for this year's Gen Con, but yeah, it's good to watch out for like canceled flights or any convention where the weather might be tumultuous. So just like be wary of
Yeah.
that. But yeah, no, overall it was a really good show. Had a lot of fun. Met a lot of new friends as well as old friends, and made record sales that I was like blown away by. So all in all, really good convention, and 10 out of 10 would do again. I highly recommend it for anybody who's thinking about applying, at least try to apply and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing with us, Lauren. That was super helpful.
Of course. I feel self-conscious because I feel like I've been rambling this whole episode.
Wow.
But yeah, if you like our episode and like our content, like what we're doing, go ahead and smash that like button, hit that subscribe. Leave a comment if you're so willing, or and thank you for participating in the chat as always. If you are interested in the conversation and want to keep it going while we're not airing episodes, we have a Facebook group called the Painted in Color. Oh my God, I do this every single time, called the Painted in Color podcast discussion group. That's on Facebook. And so we usually post a discussion topic before each episode. And it's a good community, so feel free to join if you are interested. And above all, I hope you have a wonderful week. And I hope that you have wonderful conventions if you are so willing to apply to them, and that they are as successful as I had, success here. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. I'll talk to you later.